Imagine that the entire universe, the entire known universe, well, what we do know of it, was filled with zeros. All of them were zeros, and those zeros were the size of the smallest thing that we can comprehend, the size of the smallest particles. And there was one somewhere in the midst of that infinite, or seemingly infinite sea of zeros. And then I gave you the power, and put a blindfold over you, gave you the power to find the one in all those zeros. You could teleport anywhere you wanted in the universe, but meanwhile, there's all sorts of galaxies and suns and etc. And you had one opportunity to teleport and put the tip of your finger on that one. What is the chance that you would find that one? Well, it turns out the chance that you would find that one in the sea of that zero is 1 billion times greater than the chance that our universe would have come to exist in a state where it is neither expanding too fast so that galaxies could congeal, or reducing so fast that the universe would essentially collapse in on itself, which the first one with the rapid expansion would be labeled a heat death, and the second one is called the big crunch. Anyways, that's how much I understand what I just talked about, and just did that idea for you to kind of paint a picture of the unlikeliness of, in fact, the impossibility of you. Now, imagine that same scenario, but adding a whole realm of zeros. The reason why I said zeros and 1 is because the chances that we live in this universe with this level of fine-tuning is the number, if we were to think about it, is the number 1 followed by more zeros than there are conceived than there are elementary particles in the known universe. Something like that, approximating that. But the big picture, like, all you have to remember is that all these things, along with many other things, including the biochemical challenges to evolution and the probability that shows that there was a theistic designer at the beginning, transcendent, divine, logos, as the Greeks would call the divine organizing principle at the beginning of all space, time, and energy, who spoke the world into existence, right? And the one with all the following zeros represents the chances, one in all those chances, that we would be in a universe with as low of an entropy state as we are in. So sometimes non-theists or atheists will chop it up to the anthropic principle, and will say that as human beings, we walk around in this existence and we attribute to ourselves meaning within this existence, and so therefore we have postulated a divine being, a presence, to our own existence, and in order to help make sense out of the world and give ourselves purpose and meaning. And they will also point to kind of counteract the seeming presence of order and fine-tuning, as well as the presence of being and consciousness and conscience and morality, and all these arguments. To counteract that, they will bring up, and I think rightly so, the existence of chaos within all this perceived order. There's also chaos, or as we could call it, entropy, and that entropy exists in things like cancer and things like murder. One would signify physical entropy in regards to health, and the other would signify moral entropy in regards to ethics. And so both of these things show that we do live in a simultaneous existence where there is an insurmountable, imperceptible amount of order that signifies that there was a divine logos, a creator at the beginning, and also an undeniable presence of chaos and evil in the midst of that existence that would signify that maybe there's not as much order as we would suppose. So both of those things go hand in hand and kind of keep continuing the argument for and against God, both the existence of God and the moral characteristics of God. So I wanted to call this video Entropy and Prophecy, showing that this idea of entropy was not by accident, and that, in the beginning, Genesis 1:1, if you put everything that I just talked about in the context of that simple, mythical idea of, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And what did God say? Let there be light. And then there was light, and he spoke all things into existence. Put that into the cosmological, scientific viewpoint. You rewind the tape, you play it back, and eventually you get to ground zero, where the explosion happened and the bang and all the universes or whatever came into being. Well, that point, as hypothesized by Roger Penrose and people like Stephen Hawking, was the infinitely dense, incomprehensibly small singularity, which they called, because the singularity would have to be the containing all the potentiality for time, matter, space, and energy, all within one principal elementary particle, which is smaller than any form of matter that we have in the known universe. And that singularity was just a term used to try to bridge the idea of the transcendent with the transcendent that exists outside of our own existence and perception with what we can perceive as being everything in our known existence. That's the way I see it anyways. And you pair it becomes even more profound in my eyes when you pair that notion of Genesis 1:1 with the corresponding New Testament version of the beginning in John 1:1. And I always go back to these verses, forgive me, but I think they're elemental and crucial. They're like showing the singularity, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That word signifies logos, which, again, Greek word for what they thought was like what modern people would say is the universe. They thought was the logos, the divine organizing principle, was the Word. But also the word corresponds to another term that would have been familiar to Jews, the Aramaic term mamre. So mamre was basically the word that signified the divine manifestation of God to all the prophets, to all the people in the Old Testament, to the people in Genesis, to Jacob, or to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and whoever else that the Word manifested himself to Samuel, to everybody in the Old Testament. So this word would have both to Jews and Greeks. Remember in 1 Corinthians, Jews look for wisdom. Jews look for power and miraculous signs. Greeks look for wisdom. So the Logos kind of fulfills that wisdom of the Greeks, which we're not Greeks, but Gentiles outside of the Jewish religion generally were looking for answers, and Jews were generally looking for signs. So the Logos fulfills what the Greeks were looking for, and the Mamre fulfills what the Jews were looking for in the manifestation of God to fulfill all these prophecies. Basically, all of Scripture testifies to this divine organizing principle, this Mamre who manifested himself all the time to the prophets, at some point entering in to the human stage as the Messiah and redeeming all humankind. Or so the prophecies said. And so this man, Jesus, comes onto the scene in the 1st century AD, when the Roman Empire is in the height of its pomp and its rule, and he comes to establish a kingdom that is not of this world, right? And this is also fulfilling another prophecy, or multiple prophecies. One, for example, is from the book of Daniel, the prophecy of the four beasts, each one rising in succession, representing four earthly empires rising in succession, and then ultimately being toppled over by the kingdom of God, the revelation of God, of himself to the world, the manifestation of God. And in this whole scene, in this whole prophetic, scientific, whatever, the human stage, we also have the reality of what's going on in our daily lives. That each one of us has to wake up, get out of bed, go brush our teeth, and go about our day. And if we're not believers in God, live life the best way that we can, and try not to make mistakes, and be responsible. If we follow God, try to follow God and do the will of our Father the best we can, and follow Jesus and love him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And we have the choices laid out in front of us. Usually actually always, when we look back on our day, we will have only gone on one path throughout the whole day, in the midst of a sea of other ranging possibilities, probably a sea as vast as that first initial sea that I talked about being zeros. Anyways, this is a different style of video. I hope you're enjoying it so far. But I thought this was a fascinating concept, this idea of entropy and prophecy, because what happened shortly after the beginning was that God did create a place where there was harmony between culture and nature, where God created man, breathed life into their nostrils, gave the man the ability to live, and then that man was given a choice. Well, he had the choice to follow God and obey his commands, or to he and she, both man and woman, or to leave and to depart from the way of God, and ultimately be exiled out of that place where there was perfect harmony, where it wasn't just low entropy, you could say, but a zero probability of entropy at all. And after that commandment was broken, the exile happened. And I think one of the things that's so hard for people to believe, the story of Genesis and the corresponding following stories, even Christians don't believe Genesis, a lot of them, and the following primeval events that happened, is because of their mythical nature, I could say. But you could see that in a place of such harmony, such continuity between God and man, the spiritual and the earthly, there would be a mythical substance, or what we would see as a mythological substructure that underlies the simplicity of the story and the basic psychology of all human beings. But ultimately, at its core, I think that it's far more conceivable that these things were formed, spoken into existence, given life, whatever you want to call it, made and created by a God, rather than everything happening through chaos in that one in a bajillion chance of a probability of everything coming into being. And when you follow God, you start to really realize this is the case when you're knowing him and keeping in step with him, and things are happening and things are unfolding in ways that you would not expect, and you're like, wow, that was a strange coincidence. And eventually these things, they have very low probabilities of happening, so much that if you add them all together, it's virtually impossible that these things would be coincidence. Yet what Solomon says is that everything is meaningless. Everything is meaningless apart from God. So, well, I added that last part. Everything is meaningless apart from God, right? Jesus says, apart from me, you can do nothing. And so there is a way that you can split away from order and meaning, and you can start to experience this entropy in your life where there's a lack of meaning, or an abscess of meaning. And I think that the way that happens is because of viewing everything in reality, in heaven and earth, as purely coincidence stemming from chaos. I think it's interesting that in that story of the beginning in Genesis, one of the first scenes that you see in the description is waters. The Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. Now, I've talked about this in a recent video. One of the scariest, most formidable beasts that's associated with the waters is the great Leviathan, and that is the beast of confusion and the beast of chaos, also associated with pride and other things. But we should associate him with chaos and confusion and living in these dark waters. Of course, in Revelation, when the beast rises out of the sea, one of its appearances is as a dragon, a great dragon that rises out of the sea with multiple heads, and that is the mythical creature, the Hydra or the Leviathan. And so, what the waters represent also is spoken of in the prophecies, or told in the prophecies, that the waters represents the multitude of people. So you could think of it as this multitude of people. From them a spirit arises, a spirit of what comes to be known as the Antichrist, and actually becomes a man in the future. But this is such a formidable, terrifying beast that it causes all this destruction in the world, but ultimately it's heading to its own destruction, as is laid out in the prophecies, because the Son of Man is going to come and have victory, and all the people who are in him will have victory, even though they probably submitted to a partial destruction at the hands of this entity, this Antichrist, this beast. And so you could see that that idea of high entropy kind of overtaking the initial present harmony of the universal goodness that God intended in his creation. That eventually, as Paul says in Romans chapter 8, the world was subjected to futility, all of creation subjected to futility. The creation awaits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed, and then the sons of God are revealed, and there's victory. But I wanted to take all this hypothetical stuff. Well, I don't think this is purely hypothetical, because I wouldn't be saying this if I didn't think that there was truth in it. And just boil it down to a core precept, going back not to the word logos, but to the word mamre, the manifestation of God to all the prophets. There's some very interesting moments in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis and elsewhere, where God appears to people in visible form, in human form. And one of those areas, or one of those moments, is with Abraham. God appears to Abraham, and right before he's about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and he speaks with Abraham, and Abraham actually meets with him and two other angels, and makes them food and eats with them. He also appears to Isaac, and then he appears to Jacob. He appears to Jacob once in a dream at Bethel, and then he appears to Jacob and wrestles with him throughout the night. And actually, in this wrestling match, he's being overcome by Jacob, and I mean, he cheats, but he's God, so he can cheat, right? He hits Jacob in the socket, and Jacob's socket gets sprained, and Jacob's kind of wrestling him. Maybe I imagine he has him in a headlock, and the angel of Yahweh is who this figure is, says, "Let me go, because it's about to be daytime." And Jacob says, "I won't let you go unless you bless me." Which I every time I read this story, it just almost brings a tear to my eye, just because it just speaks to the part of me that loves to wrestle as a child, but also knows who God is, and knows that. And then you think of it in the context of the whole Israel history and the whole human history, that God has been wrestling with humans, and at times it looks like humans are going to prevail. And the same story happens with Israel. God wrestles with Israel. This is where Jacob gets his name, Israel, is from the angel of Yahweh, and then he names that place Peniel, which means I've seen the Lord face to face and lived. We know that language as well with Moses, that Moses saw the Lord face to face and lived. And so it's interesting that this Mamre, this kind of angel of the Lord figure, was both distinct from God, Elohim, because the word used for angel of the Lord was malak, and the other word for God was Elohim. Yet the scriptures were written it almost looked like a mistake to Jews at the time, but the scriptures were written almost as to unite these two characters into one person, so as to present kind of a dual Yahweh figure, which obviously Jews are monotheistic. And so when Jesus came into the world in the first century, and started talking about, before Abraham was born, I am, that you have the idea of the Word being with God, and that this Jesus Christ, the Word, became flesh and made his dwelling among us, that God became a human being. That was the whole incarnation. Why did the wise men go to Bethlehem and worship the child Jesus? Because they knew that this was the child who had been given to redeem humanity from their sins, to reconcile this creation that had been brought into entropy, and to bring it into its new form, to bring about the new Jerusalem, the city of Israel that would prevail, that Jacob's blessing would come to fulfillment. And so anyways, those were some ideas that I had today, and I'm grateful to God that he is who he is, and he is who he said he was, and he is real, and we can trust in him, we can put our hope in him. And I just want to tie this all up by remembering and having you remember what God went through for us. That when he appeared to Abraham, he told Abraham to bring his son to Mount Moriah, and his son was brought to this mountain, and Abraham prepared his son as a sacrifice according to the will of God, because Abraham trusted God. And the whole time you're reading the story, you're like, why would God have Abraham do this? There's not really understanding until you see what happened to Jesus in that same location, or roughly the same location, that 2,000 years later, after Abraham sacrificed his son Isaac, but God, of course, said, stop, you don't have to sacrifice him. Now I know you'll obey me, and that you love me, right? And 2,000 years later, of course, God's own son was sacrificed for us, and gave his life for us on the cross. And so at the core of I think at the core of the message that I wanted to speak today is not the power, is not even the creativity, it's not the knowledge of God, the wisdom of God. At the core of all of creation, the singularity, so to speak, is the cross. The singularity. I mean, you think of a cross, it's all pointing to one place in time and space, and that place was where Jesus laid down his life for all people. And he did that in order to reconcile this creation that had entered into a high state of entropy to its creator, who intended no entropy to be there at all, who intended no death to be in the world at all. So anyways, that's about it. If you like this, if this is helpful for you, please share it with somebody, show it to them. And if you like, comment, subscribe, that'd be awesome too. Let me know your thoughts. Was I on target or off target? Thanks, guys. God bless.